You know, I'm always looking at feedback from you guys in the comments section on what I can do better and how to improve my videos. And one of the biggest suggestions I see time and time again is to try out new games and analyze things that just aren't predominantly my wife and side chick, Cyberpunk 2077 and Prey. And these proposals have led me down the path of trying out a bunch of new things like JRPGs, which I still have trouble loving, and smaller indie titles that I never gave a shot because I wasn't sure they were for me. But amongst a sea of so many titles that honestly fell flat, the ones that did stick with me all had one thing in common. They were hard. And I think that's for a very specific reason, because it's only the games where I not only enjoyed the design, world, and gameplay, but also the feelings they gave me that I remember. And I think most of those feelings actually came from the sense of accomplishment I felt beating them, or pride I felt in figuring out something the experience had to offer. And emotions like that only have a lasting impact when you actually have to work hard in order to achieve them. After all, having a six-pack and being a multi-millionaire wouldn't be very impressive if everyone had already accomplished both. It's why they're so revered in our society today, and that same principle carries over to games too. For example, two smaller titles that really stuck out to me recently were Pacific Drive and Frostpunk. Because for as fun and interesting as both of these games are, they also are both ruthlessly hard. In Frostpunk, you are literally barely surviving day after day in extreme freezing temperatures as you keep your dying band of people alive, requiring you to make sacrifices daily of personnel as well as valuable resources, all in an attempt to remain standing by the end of winter. And the gameplay is just as grueling as the setup sounds. Children and families are constantly becoming sick and injured, people are dying in the streets, and in order to beat the game, you have to either force long hours of work for your citizens or maintain perfection in resource gathering and tactics, all with a myriad of choices that seem to have no right answer. In fact, if you fail in any way during these trials, you will have to start over at the very beginning of the game once again with an entire winter ahead of you, or return to a save that might already be doomed because of your past choices. In Pacific Drive, by contrast, instead of controlling an entire city, you simply are the driver behind one mysterious paranormal car that has been caught up in a top-secret government zone with no way out but driving right into the heart of the madness. You have to set up one adventure after another deeper into this foreboding zone, as throughout each drive you are met by an entire host of new anomalies and strange entities that will attack your car, launch you off ledges, or rip the doors from your vehicle right off their hinges. And with every little bit of damage you take, every scrape on your car, or bump into a tree you make, you suffer damage that then must be repaired and salvaged in order to go out again. And worst of all, at the end of each run, you must full speed make your way back to a closing circle that if you fail to drive into in time, you lose almost everything. Your car will be wrecked and your supplies gone, meaning potentially hours of fighting for your life and gathering to progress. You simply lose it all. No save games to back you up, no checkpoints, you just teleport back to your garage much further behind than you were before. Because both Pacific Drive and Frostpunk have a ruthless view on struggle and suffering in games. In both titles, failure is not an option, and when you do face defeat, you are met with the worst kind of loss, where all of your work from before can be written off as a complete waste of time in many cases. Or you will be set back so far you will be banging your head against a wall in anger. And yet, despite how agonizing that sounds, and by the way, it is, trust me, that sense of suffering and intensity and difficulty is also, funnily enough, what makes both games so great too. Because in contrast to the harrowing defeats, the successes and victories in games too feel so satisfying. When I first made my way into the Deep Zone, the second part of the Pacific Drive journey, which was home to even crazier monsters and mysteries to solve, I felt an immense sense of elation, not only because the zone was cool, other games have cool lore and mystery too, but because I knew how much I struggled to get there, and I finally did it. All of those tires that went flat, all of my broken windshields I had to repair, or headlights that lost power as I had to sift my way through a completely dark forest full of trees I crashed into in a desperate escape only to die, suddenly became all worth it. Because I had pulled off something that was actually worth pulling off. A game that wasn't just fun, but also gave me a sense of pride, too. Something unique to games as an arts medium. And it's really underrated just how much more that can make you fall in love with any title. I thought the lore and world was interesting in Pacific Drive before, but after such huge successes, after countless hours of suffering, I almost felt like I owed it to myself to keep playing to figure out more. And it really does make you feel so much more invested in a game and everything it has to offer. Or in Frostpunk, beating the game for the first time and realizing I was only able to do so because I had mastered the mechanics so well that I truly deserved it after so many deaths. That's the kind of feeling that only a game that relishes in the difficulty can provide. And it's something we crave as human beings too. For as much as we complain about struggle and sacrifice, if you think back on the most nostalgic parts of your life or the moments that define who you are now, usually they were from the hard times, not the easy ones. In a way, nostalgia is nothing more than memories without the pain, and there's a reason for that. Pain, as weird as it sounds, breeds fulfillment and thus happiness. And the games we play often are addictive not only because they are mindless pleasure, but rather something a little deeper than that. I mean, really think about it for a second. Difficulty is intrinsically at the core of what makes us want to play games in the first place. For instance, why do you think so many gamers like achievements? On the surface, they are essentially completely useless, nothing more than a fake set of points or rewards that don't actually mean anything. But it's because achievements show to ourselves and others, if only for a moment, that we did something hard and won. And it's also why the most sought after achievements out there are, you guessed it, always the most grueling ones. The PlayStation Platinums, Steam achievements no one bothered to subject themselves to, or the satisfying Xbox ding sound that only a small percentage of each achiever hears. Or what about speedrunners? People who intentionally play a game in a way it wasn't meant to be played just to try and get a new record that others will admire. Why do these gamers spend so much time of their lives learning the exact timing for jumps, or put so much effort into seeing how fast they can open doors and slide down hills? It's because the human spirit at its deepest level craves suffering. Because only in suffering do our souls find purpose, meaning, and admiration from others due to our accomplishments and tenacity. Imagine playing something like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, or Bloodborne on easy mode, where every boss was mindlessly defeated, the world felt inviting and happy rather than dangerous, and learning the lore was as simple as engaging with the main story rather than having to piece together everything yourself through countless droves of incoherent writing. The pain of going through all of that is the exact reason so many people love FromSoft games in the first place, and also the reason so many other studios are clamoring to make similar entries like Lies of P that evoke the same emotion. In an industry that was making easier and easier games every year, FromSoft went against the grain and started to make extremely difficult titles, which resonated with audiences everywhere so much because they felt like an actual challenge, an actual journey, not just witless button pressing. And just like how in Pacific Drive, I grew to love the game more and more because of the intense difficulty, often the bosses I remember most and are talked about most online in something like Elden Ring are the ones that provided the biggest obstacle. Entire memes were made about beating Millennia, the hardest boss in the game, for example. Or even easy bosses like the Ancestral Spirit leave such a lasting impact because of how hard they were to find initially. In the Ancestral Spirit's case, you only get to this hulking beast if you stumble upon a secret underground cave full of stars, after which you then deduce you need to light a series of torches that will then unlock a random deer carcass at the top of a temple. None of this shows up in quest logs, none of it are things that the game tries to hold your hand for, and uncovering the Ancestral Spirit or beating a boss like Millennia comes down to nothing more than your skill and determination as a player. Or in other words, things that aren't given to you easily. In fact, my biggest gripe with a lot of other open world games after playing Elden Ring is exactly this problem. In Ubisoft open worlds, for example, like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, everything is so easy and straightforward, and because of that, nothing feels worthwhile. When every single quest, all hidden treasure, and anything interesting is displayed on my map with a question mark or map marker for me to see, all of the adventure and struggle of figuring that out for myself goes right out the window. Knowing what's behind every corner makes it so that none of those corners in the map matter anymore. And when you combine that with combat that lacks the depth and challenge of Elden Ring as well, eventually after playing Ubisoft games for long enough, for example, you start to ask yourself the question, why? And the funniest thing is, Ubisoft games are actually fun to play. The moment-to-moment action is pretty good, there are cool takedown animations and ways to infiltrate bases and take on multiple enemies, and they're really beautiful. But none of that actually matters when there isn't a deeper challenge at all in the gameplay, design, or narrative. The answers are always spoon-fed to us, and because of that, our brains have nothing left to look forward to. The challenge in a game, just like in real life as well, is innate to the motive behind why we play in the first place. Even Helen Keller, a woman that was unable to see or hear, learned through her adversity what this exact meaning of life was. Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, vision cleared, ambition inspired, and success achieved. And for me, it's also a perfect example of what makes games so interesting when compared to, say, movies, television, or music. They add that extra element of suffering that is crucial to what makes our real lives so memorable in the first place and allow us to either fail or overcome challenges, giving us a sense of pride or frustration that no other mediums can. And for those of you that are curious, this same principle is the reason immersive sims are my favorite genre of games out there. And for those of you who aren't curious, you're in too deep now. Because the reason things like Deus Ex, Prey, Underrail, and to a lesser extent even BioShock speak to me so much is that they're all games that focus on giving the player agency over the environment, with lots of different ways to tackle problems, while as often as possible answering yes to any time the player asks whether they can do something. And when you design a game around core principles like this, it allows you so much more freedom in making difficult and also interesting confrontations. Like in Prey, how you can use the glue cannon to not only freeze enemies in place, but also to build makeshift staircases to high up places that you otherwise wouldn't see until the end of the game. Or even one case where I literally beat the game 20 hours before I was supposed to by spending an hour stacking boxes and making glue bridges to get to a working escape pod without using a special key first to deploy a bridge. When you give players such an extensive sense of freedom like this, it allows them to solve things in their own way, and because there are so many different options, you can craft encounters that are much more difficult and require the player to think on the fly. And I can't tell you how satisfying it was beating Prey like that for the first time so early on, because it really made me feel powerful even when going up against a game that could throw a lot of BS at me at times. Because the thing is, while suffering and hardship in games can be extremely rewarding, it's only when that difficulty is also designed well that it all comes together. Because when there are issues, it can unravel quickly. But now I want to touch on a topic that might be a little controversial. And that's that the rise of accessibility in games may just be a glaring issue that flies in the face of the same struggle that makes games so magical. You see, I'm not talking about things like colorblind modes, custom controllers, or increased font sizes. Those are all great and allow more people to play the games we love despite their conditions. What I'm speaking to more is things like easy or god modes, heavy reliance on saving, or even specific features like arachnophobia filters. Because even for something that seems as unobtrusive as a spider being a block of text or blob instead of the real thing, can have drastic effects on the art and meaning behind behind games. For example, Lethal Company and Grounded are among a slew of recent releases that allow players to completely remove spider depictions in their game if they so choose, for those that have a striking fear of the creepy crawlers. And while this seems like nothing more than a harmless option to give people the choice to do what they want, I actually think it's a lot more detrimental than just that. Because when you're playing a game like Lethal Company or Grounded, the spiders are meant to be a huge and scary threat. They were put into the game under the specific conditions and presumption in design that players would see them and feel a sense of terror as they ran away or figured out a solution. But when you remove the intense look of these monsters entirely, it takes away so much of what the games aim to be. Because even for people with a horrible fear of spiders, myself included, it's the struggle and suffering of going up against their fear and conquering it that makes the experience so much more memorable and impactful. By even giving players the option to simply bypass struggle like this, you also rob them of the enlightening moments they otherwise could have had if they faced those fears head on. It's the same problem so much of our society has in modern days as well, where we try to coddle and protect so much of our own and others' innocence that we forget how vital pain and growth is too. And also, how linked both are. And I know how ridiculous it might sound that I'm complaining about people having an option to turn off spiders in games, but truthfully, it's the deeper principle behind it all that worries me the most. Imagine if a game like Dark Souls had an easy option, where your health pool was tripled and even the most difficult bosses died to just a couple hits. It would entirely defeat the point of the series in the first place. And when I see other gamers or YouTube commenters beg for ways to make FromSoft or other types of games easier, I feel like they're completely missing the point. Games, just like life, aren't all about you. Just because you want to be able to play something, or just because something is too hard for a certain group of people, doesn't mean we should make it easier. Because guess what? In the real world, things will never be easy, and it's only by facing challenges and difficulty head on that we become something we're actually proud of. And the reason I think games for the most part should strive for this as well is because whether it's in our real lives or in a fictitious game world, the core psychology of hard work and overcoming struggle still are intrinsic to our fulfillment as people. You may not like it, but our souls as human beings crave something more than just endless fun, than a life with no other purpose than being happy, whatever that even means. And it's for that same reason that I've kept arguing in multiple videos that more games should do away with save systems that allow us to save scum or have do-overs for vital moments. I get why people like it. I mean, hell, I have played so many RPGs where I do it constantly before every big choice, because it allows me to see all of the outcomes as well as craft my perfect story. But when you go back and play a game like Baldur's Gate 3 in Honor Mode, which doesn't even have any manual saves at all, it makes you realize how much more of an impact choices have when there are real consequences. Once again, the struggle and hardship is the key ingredient in our experience. Having a get out of jail free card or a filter for every scary monster sounds nice on paper, but in reality, it's only good in the moment. And just like an addictive drug, only feels happiness in the short term while sapping away all the fulfillment we would have otherwise had long term. Another great example is Alan Wake 2, the first horror game I ever got into because of how scared of them I usually am. I had to force myself every day to play despite my apprehensions and fears. But by the time I beat it, I felt so satisfied that I had done it, and along the way garnered a completely new appreciation for the genre, and I've been playing a lot of the other horror greats ever since. With too many accessibility features, I could have turned off all the jump scares, removed any disturbing images like spiders and undead, and filled the background with fun children's birthday party music instead of haunting chimes. But only by foregoing any sort of accessibility to help me with my fears did I experience something greater and everlasting by conquering it myself. And because we as humans have a propensity to take the easy route, despite it maybe not being what's actually best for us, I think it's important as many games as possible force this difficulty on us, because that's where we see real growth and have memories of our favorite games of all time. I will say though, I do see the other side. For example, imagine you have a grandma or father who has never played games their whole life trying to engage with even the most basic of FPS games. They would struggle to shoot, to walk, and wouldn't even have the faintest sense of how different fundamental mechanics we've all grown up with work. So for people like this, having features to make things more easy to handle or accomplish would be really great. But once again, even in cases like this, I would argue that only a very few handful of games should even remotely focus on an audience like this. Because at the end of the day, some level of struggle is required when first getting into anything, and creating too much accessibility, too much ease of access, or dumbing down of mechanics just makes the experience worse for everyone who already went through the satisfying challenge to first get into games, or anything for that matter.